Hi everyone, my name is Jim, and as it's a Mental Health Awareness Month, we are celebrating at Concentrix. So myself and Aimee wanted to record a podcast and talk about mental health as an issue and the amazing things that we're providing at Concentrix as well. So Aimee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Aimee Carton, and I am calling from Dublin, Ireland. It is a miserable day here, as it always is in Dublin, but I don't even know what to do to say to introduce myself because it's so awkward and uncomfortable when we're talking about mental health to even think of where to start my background or who I am. But I work with the global wellbeing team and I have a long history of mental health and mental illness, and it's really put me in a position to get here today to get to talk to all of you. So that's a little bit about myself. What about you, Jim?
So I completely empathise. It's really difficult and awkward to introduce yourself on this topic. But we did have an idea before we started recording of a way to be transparent and open and honest with finishing the sentence. I am a mental health advocate, but um, and I have quite a few buts that I could put on the end of that sentence. But the one I've gone for is I'm a mental health advocate, but despite knowing it's not good for me, I constantly, on a daily basis, compare my life to others around me, whether that's on social media or in real life, and only to do myself disservice. And I think, why am I not achieving those things? Why am I not as proactive as that person? Or I wish I was, as intelligent as this person, whatever it may be. I know to my core that that is such a bad thing to do, and every day I do it without really thinking about it. So, mental health advocate, but I compare myself to others for no right or reason.
It's a tough one though. It's such a hard kind of
Mm,
routine to break. You kind of have to really challenge your thinking. I love this. I love I'm a mental health advocate, but because it's true, we're great at preaching the good preach, but when it comes to practice, it can be hard.
exactly.
So I think I'm a mental health advocate. I don't think I know I'm a mental health advocate. I really care about it. But whenever I watch like a rom com or some cheesy chick flick, which I adore, and it's such a guilty pleasure of mine, I judge the heck out of them. I do full armchair psychology, and I'm so hypocritical in judging them. And
Wow.
then when they're not drinking and not exercising and they're, you know, ruining their lives by not taking care of themselves, I judge that. But then I do the same thing. So I'm so hypocritical towards it, but then I don't listen to the good actions and the good routine and the meditation. I don't do it either. So then it's basically just me hating on myself, which is a fun journey to go on.
It's so similar, like both of our answers to that, about how we're projecting a feeling onto others.
It's
Yeah.
crazy, isn't it? It's always the thing. I think that's so much of the foundations of mental health. So much of the experiences are shared. And I think that's why today is such an awesome opportunity because, you're looking at others and comparing yourself to them. I'm, not listening to the rules, not listening and
Yeah,
trying to do the things that I know would help me feel better. But there's so many people out there who go through this. All of us have a
definitely.
mental health. All of us go through this. So it's important to talk about it.
I really hope that in this conversation, but the two of us can take things away of like how I'm going to live differently or stop doing these bad actions to myself, whatever it may be. And especially this month when there is more encouragement to talk about mental health and mental health awareness month. But I mean, that shouldn't be the case here, happening once a month. This should be, an all year round thing. Um, but I would just also want to take that moment to encourage anyone who's watching or listening. If me and Aimee are talking about personal experiences, and you can apply that to yourselves, we would absolutely do our best to give advice and guidance of the best way to approach different things in your life. And please take that on board and try to put it into practice because it's not an easy thing, but practice is the best sort of methodology in order to make it part of your natural life.
Absolutely. And consistency. I'm gonna say it's practice, but consistency. Kind of like I'm a mental health advocate, but you know, mental health is 12 months of the year, like you say. It's not just this month. It's every day. All of us experience it every day, just like we experience physical health every day. And making those practices a routine, making them consistent, making it a part of your life, it's something that can be kind of hard to start. I sometimes find it's hard to start things or hard to stay committed. How, how have you gone about that? This is me genuinely being curious, and I'm like,
Um,
because I do think if we share our stories, other people hear and
Absolutely. I think I've tried loads of different techniques over the years, thinking it was going to be the beginning of a new habit, and it hasn't worked out for me. And that was a really important lesson to find what works for you. And for me, it's probably journaling. Um, I tend to overthink about things all of the time, and like I find it really difficult to switch off, and my mind can become quite overwhelmed from whether it's work related or personal, family, whatever it may be. And getting it out of my mind onto paper, I find so therapeutic. I don't do it every day, like I wish I could. Just being realistic, life gets in the way, but that's definitely what I found really helpful. And also knowing the freedom of journaling. When I first started, I would write Dear Diary, and I thought I had to do that. Whereas now sometimes I draw a picture, there's no words, just drawing
yeah,
a picture, and I can do whatever I want in that journal. And that was really liberating.
yeah,
That's something that worked for me because other techniques that I've tried in the past, so I'm talking is ironically in doing a podcast now, I find quite difficult, especially talking,
mm,
seeking help. I find it really difficult to accept help when it's presented to me.
yeah,
Um, and that's something that I've had to work on in the past. I've got an amazing support network around me, and I've definitely, struggled to lean into that support. So through journaling and self-reflecting, professional help. I go to therapy on a weekly basis, just virtually, and speaking to my therapist about all of this. Um, the different methodologies has certainly helped me. And I think it's exactly what I said of finding the right approach for me was
mm,
the biggest lesson I learned without even realizing it was a lesson to learn. Um,
absolutely.
I kind of used to think really naively that people with positive mental health, they knew exactly what to do in order to sustain that, rather than
Absolutely.
go through that like exploratory phase of finding the right approach. You know?
God, that's so true. You kind of have this notion that the gym yogis or the yogis who on the beach who
Yes.
know perfectly how to meditate, who can do breath work, who they have it all sorted.
Mm.
But it's so true that there's no one definition of what good
Mm.
mental health is.
No. What
I
about?
like that. Hmm?
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I like that approach of having multiple different viewpoints and trying different things because I think as our lives evolve, our needs change, our mental health state, our mental status and our mental health will change. And what we need at those times also changes. And I
Yes.
think trying new things is important. I often compare it to physical health because I think it's such a great comparison because they go hand in hand. But
Mm.
sometimes I'm not able to push myself do weights and do full cardio and do the full intense workout. I sometimes need that kind of more step back stretching. And then other times I've injured myself and I need to go for physio and it's just like going for therapy. It's so interesting having that viewpoint, except when we talk about mental health and talk about these practices or these techniques of embedding a proactive strategy into our life, it's just so stigmatized. And I think that's such an important part of this month that we normalize the actions that people can do each day, but also normalizing the conversation itself is so important. And one of the things you signposted was your supports and like talking to people, but talking to people about this, actually having the conversation is so hard.
Yeah.
It's such a tough one being vulnerable with others.
Hmm.
And I was just thinking, is there anything that you've kind of done over the years that has helped you kind of normalize having those conversations with your friends, your loved ones, like the people around you?
Um, I mean, I've often been sought out as the listener. So friends or family would come to me and say, I'm struggling with this. So I kind of took their approach and put it into my own practice, and just being as blunt as possible and being forward at the beginning of a conversation really helped me. So I could turn around and say to a friend, I'm really, really struggling and feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And just getting that initial sentence out felt like I was coming up for air. The rest of
Yeah,
the conversation then seemed much easier, and I could really approach and tackle that because I'd ripped the plaster off at the beginning, is how it felt. Um, and I think also, the, rightly or wrongly, the people that I've spoken to are the ones that have spoken to me as well. So I kind of already knew that this person wasn't going to be judgmental, wasn't going to have a different mindset of, thinking that I'm weak or anything like this, just because I am struggling. And so finding the right person was probably step one, and I'll say step two was just diving straight into that conversation.
Mm.
And it's the same reason why I love therapy. So why I do it is, sometimes I turn up to a therapy session with nothing to talk about, and I think I don't need this today. Why am I here? And 40
Yeah.
minutes later, I could be crying my eyes out about this thing
Yeah.
I didn't even know was bubbling away under the surface. So yeah, the conversations they can naturally unfold, but when they're needed, I think my own personal approach and technique is to it is a cry for help. Essentially, that first sentence is, I really need help. I don't know what the help specifically is, or sometimes I don't even know what the issue is, but the fact that I've reached out almost to grab someone's hand is kind of how I visualize it. That's
Mm.
the biggest sort of step. And then the rest just naturally unfollows.
I
What
love
about you?
that. I love that visualization of, reaching out and grabbing the hand. It's so true.
Mm,
I think for me it's similar. I think the pandemic did, like, COVID-19 was one of the worst things to happen
yeah.
for so many people, and we're still seeing the impact from a mental health and mental illness perspective even today.
Mm,
But I think it really normalized reaching out and asking, how are you? And kind of reaching out and asking that question twice. Because I think a lot of people, when someone says, "Oh, how are you?" At least in Irish culture, we say, "Oh, grand." It's not even a question. It's almost like a greeting. And I
mm,
think with the pandemic, it really normalized asking it with more intent. And I think that was really incredible. Like, it was so incredible that we suddenly started asking to genuinely care and get the answer back, because people, when they are low, they have signs. Like, I definitely exhibit a lot of signs when I start to deteriorate and I start to go downward. So I think the fact that there are those signs and now people are starting to ask, I think that's incredible. And I think it's something that we've definitely maintained as a people. Like, maybe it's just the culture of Concentrix that we always allocate a few minutes at the start of every call where we're checking in with one another and asking and kind of signposting to mental health, even though it's not explicit. It's more just genuinely caring about your coworkers and colleagues and the game changers around us, which I think is really special. I know it's kind of cheesy, but I think it's
no, not
special.
at all. Also, I bet you're totally unaware. You're really good at doing that, because when we have our calls at work, you rarely say "How are you?" You always say "How are you feeling?"
I didn't know I did that.
Yeah, that
That's a great tip.
definitely. I give a different response, because "How are you?" Yeah, fine. What about you? It's like you say a greeting. It's not a sincere. When you say "How are you feeling?" I mean, there's times in the past where I would have said to you, "Yeah, I'm a bit stressed by this," or maybe I am feeling fine, but I've thought about the question before giving an answer.
That's
So just a
awesome.
slight little change.
I
Yeah,
didn't know I did that. I'm pat on the back to me, but I think that's actually a great tip for other people moving forward. Like,
definitely.
something as simple as adding that extra word, like the fact that it makes people think, and it's such an easy thing to do. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. It also, I think, small changes to conversations like that will reduce stigma when it
Yeah,
becomes a little bit more normalized. Like you said, since the pandemic, it's chalk and cheese really compared to how it was prior. I think that's
absolutely.
going to continue now for years still. It's almost like PTSD of what the planet went through is
Of
now
course.
processing that trauma and shock, and I think it's really brought it to the front of how important mental health is, but also people found themselves probably in a position where they hadn't done before, of feeling isolated and lonely and scared and really stressed of the unknown, and these kind of things just led to a really natural response of reaching out and asking for help, or just identifying that they weren't feeling okay. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, the stigma still exists, Of course, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, as much as I wish it didn't. It does, but it definitely feels like if we could say one good thing that came out of the pandemic, hopefully it's that, which is normalizing talking about mental health.
It's so true. And
Mm,
one thing you said there about people reaching for help, a lot of times, and like I'm definitely guilty of this, I don't reach for help until I'm really, really low. Like I'm very, very low. And one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of leaders have started doing since the pandemic, and I definitely do it now, but one of the things that's really impacted me is the email signatures. And I used to roll my eyes at email signatures, and I was like, what do they actually do? Like, oh my
yeah,
God, you have all your like announcements, and there's so many signatures and different icons and images. But one of the things that's really impressive, and I've had a number of people say to me, is that it is only by having it in the signature that they're aware that there are resources out there, that the company is providing EAP access to everyone, that it's providing these tools and supports to everyone. And it's only by consistently signposting and making them visible in something as simple as an email signature, where you're never going to really you put it in once and then you don't really think about it again, but
yeah.
the difference it's making to someone who maybe isn't aware of them or wouldn't know that you are comfortable talking about mental health and signposting to mental health. It's
Mm,
crucial. That's such a
mm,
critical thing to really
mm.
realize the impact you're having, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like clever marketing having it in the email signature because,
It
like,
is.
yeah, it make you like stop and read that more potentially than like an article that goes out specifically designed to talk about mental health. I thought that could quite easily get overlooked by people. Whereas when you see and I guess this is linked to the stigma, when you see the word mental health where you ordinarily don't feel like it belongs, which I hate myself even saying that sentence, but hear me out. When you feel like it doesn't belong there, it's a bit more striking, so it gets more attention there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so true, though. Sometimes it's hard to even use that word mental health. I'm a bad mental health advocate for even saying this, but it's such a stigmatized word. And even saying it, you're kind of signposting to something very serious.
Mm,
And it doesn't need to be, it's not how it should be. But that's kind of the thought process that goes through my head. You're right, because it is so stark, it is so
mm,
serious.
yeah,
I think it's
and
also interesting you talk about marketing there. So this is totally a me thing, but I suck at marketing. I really I'm so bad at communicating in a way that there are other people who are so talented.
mm,
And I think one of the biggest things I've learned over the last few years is how not communicating and not educating and not spreading awareness, people don't realize how many supports are out there and how much support is available to you. All you need to do is ask, or all you need to do is go on our internal system core, or look for something and it is there, or it's on posters on walls. But I don't know what you think. Like, is that a crucial part in this conversation, talking about the supports and services that we provide, or is it, do we have to go further back in the education process? Like when you talk about destigmatizing mental health.
I think probably go further back. Yeah, I mean, there's also cultural impacts as well, and
Yeah.
a lot of other factors to consider. It, it's difficult as well because if you're constantly saying like promoting mental health, it's almost then buying into the fact that it is an undiscussed thing, which we want it to be so normalized. Like as a company, we are not going to start shouting from the rooftops about a dental plan, but going to the dentist is equally as important as looking after your mental health. Do you know what
Absolutely.
I mean? But if we were constantly shouting about dental plans, people would think, why? Oh, is it because it's not common? Because it's unpopular to go to the dentist? Because it's a sign of weakness? All of these, the thought processes we actually want people to avoid, and find yourself in a bit of a catch-22. And I think, like you said, having it in an email signature where it's a bit more subtle, but also a bit unexpected makes a big difference. And the services I think that we offer in Concentrix are absolutely incredible. Having such a diverse range of services, whether it's the EAP or if it was the mental wellness partners, all of these different resources available to people is incredible. I think that sits here. The other side of it is also just talking about mental health in a more generic way. And when someone is feeling great and talking about that and saying, I feel really organized with my work right now and I'm loving that sensation.
Yeah.
Something, like this is, they go hand in hand. I think the resources for when people really do need it. And you said to yourself, asking when it's too late, when you get into that low place, is really what we don't want anyone to have to experience. And then in addition to that, it's just talking about it on a day to day where it is
Yeah.
normalized and in all shapes of life. Because I don't know about you, but I really struggle with questions like, have you ever struggled with your mental health? I would never ask someone have they ever struggled with their physical health.
No.
You've probably stubbed your toe, broken your leg, whatever it is. It's probably happened to you. You've also probably been stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, and it's
Mm.
exactly the same. Yeah, it shouldn't have that extra. Um, I don't know how to describe it. Extra sort of careful approach. You know.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, I think people are nervous to ask, "Are you
Mm,
doing okay?" If they say a colleague has said that they're going through a tough time,
yeah.
the colleagues around them may be uncomfortable probing about the tough time because they don't want to upset them, or they don't want to disrupt their day, or they don't want to trigger them. And it's they're not asking sometimes out of kindness as well, because they don't want to ask the question in case it's too sensitive. And it's that real
Hmm.
unknown because of
Yeah.
the stigma. Like we have this stigma, so it's
True.
we don't have confidence either asking, or asking a question that's probably not the best question to ask. It's probably not
Yeah.
appropriately phrased. It's such a catch 22, and it can sometimes feel like an impossible situation. Like, even I'm a mental health advocate, but it's an impossible situation for me too sometimes. So I wonder, when you think about this, like, what advice would you give to a colleague who maybe wants to ask a question to another, or like check in with their colleagues or support, or even if they're worried about their own mental health and they want to improve it, how they should signpost it to others, that they're going through that tough time.
I think asking on behalf of a colleague, if you're concerned maybe about someone you're working with, one piece of advice I would give is acknowledge that in the ask and say, I'm not quite sure how to ask this. I feel a little bit uncomfortable asking a question. And just being open and honest and transparent, I think, goes such a long way rather than tiptoeing around the subject. And it's almost just being extra delicate because of those reasons you said, in case it could trigger someone, or in case they're wrong and that person's then really offended of, don't judge me for an illness that I've had in the past. I'm just maybe stressed with something much smaller, but it's not related to that. And so just being honest about, I'm not sure what is the best way to ask you this, but I want to because I'm concerned. And just having that sort of conversation, I think, is
Mm,
probably not used enough.
mm,
'Cause the other piece of advice I would give is, if you're not sure, don't go in the opposite direction and just not ask.
mm.
And I think that's a really more common, it's an understandable approach because it can be quite a fearful thing to do. Um,
Yeah,
but I think if you're not sure, then still ask a question, but just acknowledge and admit, I'm not sure how to ask the question, but my my care for you rides above my insecurities about how to ask.
that's
Um,
actually such good advice. I think just being honest and being vulnerable when you're asking those questions to someone
yeah.
is just so important, because you're creating a space of vulnerability and safety. You're letting them feel safe
Mhm.
in your like, because they can be vulnerable if you're being vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
incredible. That's great advice.
What was the second? Actually, you answer the second one. Make it.
Oh no. Oh no, you're putting me on the spot. So okay, so the second part of the question was, if you're going through a tough time, how do you tell others?
Yes.
Um, this is a hard one because I think I've done it every single way imaginable. I have done it with tears and snot. I've done it uh, very cold and very matter of fact. I've joked about my mental illness and my history of mental illness when I'm in a dark time. I'm
Mm.
very quick to use dark humor as a coping mechanism. I
Hmm.
think the best way to do it is to do it in a way that you feel most safe. That's the foundations. I think if you it's a hard topic. We know that there is a lot of fear around talking and disclosing around mental health. There is a stigma, and I've never experienced it at this company, but there is that fear that there will be repercussions. And to be clear, I've never experienced it, and I would be horrified, and I think everyone would be horrified if they had.
Mm.
But that fear it's valid. Don't let anyone invalidate it. So the first step is to feel safe, to feel like you can trust the person, and you don't need them to be a psychologist. If it's a manager, if it's a colleague, if it's someone that you interact with and just care about, signposting that you're going through a tough time is really important because people want to help each other. I would love to know if someone around me was going through a tough time, not if they were going through a tough time, but so that I could be proactive and help them, so that I could reach out my hand and be there to support them. So I think first, secure yourself, feel secure. And then secondly, do it in a way that is comfortable to you, but do disclose it because the difference it can make is transformative. So that's the very long-winded way of saying there's no right way, there's no wrong way. The best way is the way that suits you and that works for you, so long
Mhm.
as you are safe, so long as you feel heard, and so long as you feel like this is the right thing to do at the time.
Mhm.
I
I
don't know if
think
that feels like a bad advocate thing to
no.
suggest, but I
Honestly,
think
I
it's
thought
yeah.
that was great advice because it's probably a step that's overlooked. I think some people might feel the need for help and not sure where to go or how to ask, and whilst looking for an answer, haven't maybe like looked within and thought, actually, what is the way that's right for me? I think
Hmm.
that could really be overlooked, and then if you are doing it in a way that's maybe not right for you, the consequences of that could be really severe. So I think it's like a fundamental step not to be ignored.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
honestly, hand on heart, I wouldn't have considered that before you just said it. So
Yeah, one of the first times I pitched and talked openly about mental health, I got told that 20% of employers would never hire me. This was years ago and way, way before I started my working life at Concentrix or with Keep Happy. So it was like 10 years ago. But someone turned around and said to me, 20% of all job opportunities are now closed to you because of the stigma. And it really shocked me, and it's something to be part of it's something to include in the conversation of mental health awareness month and everything that we do, because the reality is that the stigma has created negative consequences for a lot of people,
of
and we
course,
need to be open about that and transparent and communicate it so that we never let it happen again. So
that's
yeah.
shocking. 20%. Do you mind me asking about anger?
Hmm?
Did you get angry
Well,
hearing
I
that?
was just about to walk on stage and speak to an audience of like 400 people, so I was more shocked.
Yeah,
Uh, but then I got angry and I looked up the statistics afterwards, and it's true. And the most accurate research was done by a tea company. They did really great research in mental health in the workplace, and it was really interesting. But
mm,
again, it was decades ago, like it was a decade ago, it was a long
yeah,
time ago. But I got really angry. And then I realized that the best solution was just to be in your face open about it, just be as transparent as I could, talk about it as much as I could. Because if I've already lost this job, this fictitious job with 20% of future employers,
yeah.
uh, like I'm never gonna, I wouldn't want to work for them. I wouldn't want them on my side. I would rather work for a company that signposts to mental health, that advocates for it, that talks about it, that
Absolutely.
hosts a podcast like this, that normalizes it, you know? Like, yeah, that was my little rant about safety in the workplace.
Absolutely. I have a question, and I'm
Mhm.
not sure how to frame it. And so to also tell me if I don't want to answer, just absolutely don't. But hearing that sort of statistic made me angry. Like immediately, my response is anger, and then I want to like fight against it. There's my instinct of I will prove you wrong, and that sort of side comes out, right? Then I started wondering, would you want to be a trailblazer, or would you actually not want to be identified with any mental health past experience you've had? And it's really hard to detach from the second without, if you are wanting to be a trailblazer and make that difference, like anyone is so much more than an illness they've been diagnosed with, but it's really difficult not for to allow that just to become their entire identity, which isn't fair. So that's what
Mm.
I wanted to ask. I don't think I've actually asked the question there.
No, I get it. I get it. I guess for me, because my career was built on my mental illness and my journey and my suicide recovery and everything that came as a result of it. So I've kind of weaponized mental health. I say that jokingly, but like I've used it to propel my career. So I am the antithesis of that statistic where I've lost 20% of employers, but with the 80%, I was able to advance my career leaps and bounds beyond anything I could have imagined.
Yeah.
But in doing so, I am very, like, I can't hide, I can't step back, I can't take it away. I will always have it front and center, and it will
Mm,
always be something that's visible for others, even in situations that maybe I'm not ready for. So I love when people come and talk to me. I love it. I love the fact that talking about mental health encourages other people to talk about mental health. And I love that people can come and tell me their experiences. But sometimes I'm not ready for it. I'm not in a psychologically safe space, and people will tell me really serious things. And that's the only negative consequence, that you, in creating a safe space, you become a safe space that people use. And that's the only challenge, but that's only like 1% of the time. 99% of the time I'm so happy to have created that safe space.
I hope that, yeah, you also give yourself recognition. We talk about it at work about the small wins. This is like an enormous win, to encourage someone else to have that conversation. Absolutely, give the recognition where,
This is me being a bad mental health advocate. I'm putting myself down. But if it was anyone else, I'd be like, yeah, of course, creating safe spaces is essential. It's the best thing you can do. But yeah,
it's the hardest thing to do, though, giving yourself that bit of praise of like, oh, well done, I did a good job there. I think
it's
most
true.
people struggle with that.
It's true. And on that note, I think we have done a good job, but I think we're letting our podcast drag on. And I know our listeners are going to, or watchers, are getting on with their busy lives. Jim, do you have any final words for our listeners and watchers and anyone who cares about mental health?
I think an audience of mental health sufferers doesn't exist, is what I'd like to just sort of finish on. And through my adolescent years, I had quite a sheltered upbringing and thought I was actually um, immune, I guess, to any mental health struggles until life events, losing family members and things hit me much harder than I was prepared for. And it really taught me that everyone has the same fragilities and vulnerabilities, and we all don't know the experiences that are still going to come our way. So please don't feel like we're either a mental health sufferer or not, like an X and Y. It really does not exist. And if you ever feel like you're struggling, or if you're concerned about someone who is, then act on that. I think is potentially one of the most important things you can do, and it requires so much bravery and courage to do so. So yeah, please, if you do fall into those categories, act on it, and then make sure you give yourself the recognition as well for having done so.
I love that. That was really incredible. My 2 cents, and I'm gonna use yours because I think it's really good. It's a good way of viewing it, but there is so many different ways to engage in mental health. We've talked about it a lot today. We've gotten great feedback, asking or great ideas thrown in here today, whether it's putting a signature at the bottom of your email, whether it is saying, how are you feeling instead of how are you? Lots of great tidbits. But I think the one thing I will always signpost to is just start. Just start. You can be a good mental health advocate, or you can try to be, or you can be a mental health advocate, but and have lots of mistakes and errors on the way, but it doesn't matter once you start the conversation and open it up just for one person. The difference you're going to make to that person and the butterfly effect you'll create can change lives.